I ran into another problem here. I couldn't find a fitting to replace the one that was in there that had gotten broken. It was just a plastic 90 elbow, and it was an old piece of heater hose and it vented to the outside. So after screwing around in a hardware store and trying to find one online that I just can't seem to do, I scoured all the old cars in the yard here and found myself an old Mr. Gasket chrome breather off a small block Chevy. Fits like a glove. And heck, a little bit of chrome will make it go faster, or so I'm told. Okay, working on the heater hoses now. As you can see, I got my rad hoses on already. The system on this thing is a little bizarre in that it has coolant passage in the intake manifold over here. So instead of just going typically through the water pump to the heater core, and then the heater core back to, say, in this case, the thermostat housing, you actually have to go through the intake first at some point. So on this, the default setting is thermostat housing goes over to the front of the intake, and then back of the intake to the heater core back to the water pump. And the hoses are just bizarre the way they run. Like, you got to do this S curve up front and stuff like that. This is necessary. If you don't run the coolant passage through the intake, which you can get away with, it's not, you don't even got to plug them off. There's no coolant that goes through there from the engine itself. The problem is, in the warmer climates, I guess you can get away with it. Up here in Canada, you'll have all kinds of problems with your carburetor when the weather turns nasty on us. I've actually had a 258. It was in a AMC Gremlin. Yes, it was my brother's 74 Gremlin X. Woo! Anyway, that we were driving her there one cold day, and you know, air moving is colder than atmospheric air, so the engine stalled and we couldn't figure what the heck was going on. We got out and looked at it, and the whole bottom of the carburetor was frosted up. Alright, so that was because of that. It wasn't warming up the intake manifold. Okay, there's a little trick for you. When the weather turns cold and you're trying to get your hoses to go over the ends, they don't want to flex. If you got a heat gun, you can heat up the end. I'm just going to use propane. And that just makes it a little more pliable. A little more cooperative. Alright, not so bad. Alrighty, one of the more fun adventures when you're dealing with heater hoses on these 258s. This one here on the water pump that goes to the heater core. Down here on the water pump is a 3/4. Everything else is a 5/8. So unless you're able to find the proper hose which has an enlarged end, which good luck because they just don't exist anymore, you're going to get stuck with some kind of an adapter setup or something else. So the 3/4 hose fits fine, but you'll never get it to stay on the heater core. It's a point of failure. Once you get pressurized and rev up the engine a few times, the thing will just end up popping off on you. So what you do here, take your 5/8 hose, bring it in the house, put it in the sink, super hot water, warm that thing up real good. Alright, once you got it good and warm and it's pliable, and you only want to warm the end, you don't want to warm the whole hose, because if this is soft, it's harder to push on. So just warm up the end. Okay, so as you can see, that is a 5/8 hose. And by warming up the end and using dish soap, alright, I forced it over a 3/4 barb. Because obviously trying to force it over that where it is nightmarish. So use a 3/4 barb of some form. This is a T, it's the plastic one that I had laying around. That's 3/4 inch. And I force it over that, and then I let it cool. And then I heat it up again, wiggle it on and off a few times, and let it cool with this in there. And that gently stretches out the end enough that with just a little bit of lubrication, and when I say lubrication, I mean hand soap. All right. I was able to squeeze it on over that 3/4 inch fitting, and it's on there good and tight now. All right. So 5/8 hose will work on that 3/4 fitting, and it won't break. You can stretch these out pretty good if you have to. Okay, so everything else is going to be 5/8, and I can move the alternator and put the upper rad hose back on. Alrighty, getting ready to start this thing up. I got lots to do yet, but I'm at a point where I want to make sure everything's good to go with the motor after the rebuild. So I've been turning it over a bit here, checking the oil pressure gauge, and I got pressure, so that's a bonus. Coolant hoses are all hooked up there. You can see there's the thermostat housing to the intake. It's 5/8. 5/8 from the back of the intake over to your heater core. 5/8 from your heater core to, yeah, that's right, a 3/4 on the water pump. Alright, like I said, you use the heat and some lubricant and work it over something a little bit, stretches it out a bit. Don't try to put it on cold, you're never going to get it. But a 5/8 will go over that 3/4 with a little bit of grit and tenacity. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm just checking to make sure I got spark. Alright, I haven't done that yet. And this here is a handy little tool. It's got a light in there. You put your spark plug wire into this end. Put that on your spark plug, get someone to turn it over, and it lights up every time it fires, and that tells you that your ignition circuit's right. Heck of a lot easier than messing around with a screwdriver in the end and trying to ground it out and looking at it, or getting your best buddy to hold on to the end of it and grounding himself out and saying, hey, just hold this a sec while you turn it over and see if he jumps or not. It's actually my favorite way to do it, but all my friends have learned that one by now, so it doesn't work anymore. I have to find some neighborhood kids, maybe. That'll work. So I'm working by myself here, so I'll try and do this by jumping the solenoid so you can see how that nifty tool works. Put it up somewhere. So all you got to do on these, take your starter wire here off of your solenoid. Okay, so all you got to do now is go to your positive terminal on your battery with a fairly heavy chunk of wire. This is 14 gauge. And go right to the terminal on your solenoid where your starter usually goes. Alright, I have ignition. Obviously you have to have the key on to do that. But like I said, really handy tool. The neighbor kids won't hate you near as much. A little bit of gas. Tricky part now is rough timing this thing by myself. Alright, so she's all rough time. Let's see if we can get a kick out of her. That's what I want to hear. Woo! We run! Fuel pressure's a little low. We're only down at about 2.8, should be 3.5, so I'm gonna have to crank that up. The idle's a little low. I'm gonna raise that up too, so it'll break in the cam and that. You can hear the lifters are a little bit noisy, but the cam and lifters and everything's got to break in. So I'm gonna go through a heat cycle. Coolant's coming up. About 12 pounds of oil. It's not bad for a low idle, and right around 13.8 volts. So everything under the hood's working.